Welcome everyone, how are things? Hopefully you're having a nice January and you haven't broken your New Year's resolutions just yet. Today we're joined again by the veteran Socialist Republican Seamus Kelly from Anti Imperialist Action Ireland. Now, for those who don't know, Seamus and I did a stream last year where we dove into the history of the Revolutionary Irish Republican movement. So today, this evening, we're going to be discussing the revolutionary movement now here today, as well as doing a few questions and answers with yourselves, the audience, throughout. So listen, if you have any questions at all that you'd like Seamus to answer that are related to the Irish Revolution, to republicanism, to Marxism, etc., then just go ahead and pop them into the live chat box and we'll work through them over the course of the conversation. Now make sure to start your questions with @MarxistPaulLive, and that way they're going to be highlighted for me and I'm not going to miss them. Now, I've got a number of questions to answer already from over in the Socialist Republican Server, touching on how AIA views religion and the Catholic Church, Irish culture and the Irish language, the nature of mass organisations, Seamus Costello's anti-imperialist broad front, the national questions of other Celtic nations like Wales, Scotland, etc. We're going to talk a little bit about British state collusion with loyalist paramilitaries and more. So this is sure to be an interesting and informative discussion, and I hope that you, the viewers, get a lot out of it. So Seamus, thanks very much for taking the time out to come on this evening. Please reintroduce yourself to the audience, telling people a little bit about Anti Imperialist Action Ireland, its ideology, its history, etc., for those who missed the last stream.
And thanks very much for inviting us back on, Paul. It's an important opportunity for us to get our ideology and our line out there to a wider people and to promote anti-imperialist action. So as you say, my name is Seamus Kelly. I'm involved with Anti Imperialist Action Ireland, and as you say, its history. AIA is now coming up on 5 years old, and it was founded as a Socialist Republican mass organisation, basically to help reorganise the struggle for national liberation and socialist revolution in Ireland. It sort of felt that at this point in time there needed to be a return to a traditional socialist republicanism that viewed any move to compromise with imperialism obviously as a wrong step, and to rebuild a vibrant social republican movement across the country. And while we started off with a small enough group of activists, we've been lucky in the last nearly 5 years to expand into new areas all across the country, and to be attracting a new wave of young revolutionaries who are very keen to get involved and play their part in our struggle. And we've moved, as I said, to expand across the country and to now have presences in all the cities in Ireland and in many of the major towns, mainly urban towns, but also support in some of the more rural parts of Ireland too. So it's still a work in progress to build AIA across the country, but we're happy with the progress that we are making.
Yeah, it's thriving at the moment. There's just posters going up everywhere, stickers everywhere, loads of artwork, everything. It's just there's a real thriving culture around it at the moment. And that brings us on to the next point I want to talk about, because viewers of the stream now are going to notice a slideshow of revolutionary art on the screen. And I'd like to take a moment to thank the comrades from around the world who've made these fantastic contributions to the Irish movement. In particular, the excellent revolutionary artists like Lucha Liberation, Young Black Maoist, Black Liberationist, and Queer Bolshevik. And also, there was a recent poem over on the Socialist Republican Server, written by a young Grenadian comrade in solidarity with the Irish struggle, and in commemoration of the upcoming 50th anniversary of 1972's Bloody Sunday, where, of course, the British soldiers gunned down 26 unarmed civilian peaceful protesters in Derry, 14 of whom died, well, 13 of course, right away, and another one a couple of months later, I think, from the injuries, you know. And the young comrade, of course, wrote this poem. It was called Blood. And so just as a tip of the hat to the young comrade who put in all this work for us, I'm just going to read it out very quickly. It'll pop up on the screen for some of the comrades here as it's scrolling through them, but I'm just going to have a little read of it here now. So it's called Blood, and it's written by Alfie Bridge-Smith. Blood ran through the streets that day, though not the blood of the tyrants. In 16, they killed Connolly. They certainly weren't above killing civilians. And so, in 72, innocent blood was spilled, but this was no Grenadian reggae song. These were the heroes, the workers, the masses, the martyrs, whose blood was spilled. That Bloody Sunday. So that's by Alfie Bridge-Smith, and of course, the young comrade attached a solidarity note beside that saying, "Solidarity from a Grenadian boy to the Irish people, in particular those still brutally occupied in the 6 counties. May both our peoples achieve true national liberation." So thanks very much to the young comrade for making that, and tying in from this particular point, all this fantastic art that's being shown, all this incredible solidarity through poetry, and I think there's other forms of art as well that are being created at the moment. But we'll have to wait and see how that develops. One of the comrades over on the Discord server, Kokiri, asked, "How can international comrades help AIA?" So, Seamus, how can activists from around the world play a role in supporting the movement for national liberation and socialism in Ireland today?
Well, just before I answer that, I just want to come in on just a couple of points that you were making there, which I think are very important and just we should touch on. And again, just as an example of young comrades coming towards the ideology and the line of socialist republicanism that's being put out by Anti Imperialist Action Ireland, that's extending beyond just the 32 counties of Ireland, and as this question relates to, it's going into international solidarity now, and there's people from all around the world getting in touch to support us, the likes of that poet, young Alfie, who feels inspired to write about the Irish struggle, which is great, and for people here in Ireland who are involved in the Socialist Republican struggle, it's great to get this type of support from overseas, that people haven't forgotten about the ongoing struggle in Ireland, and that it's still very much in the thoughts of people's minds. But just on that, like, culture is a site of revolution, and I think that's something that needs to be very much to the fore. And us as Socialist Republicans have always promoted this, that we have to have our own way. All culture is stamped with a class outlook, and we have to have our own working class, proletarian, revolutionary cultural expressions. And I think that's very important. And whether it's through artwork or through music or through poems, such as you've just read out, it shows a living movement and something that's still very much alive in the hearts and minds of people. And as you say, the artwork that is being produced, a lot of it through the work of I think it's the Discord server, the Socialist Republican Discord server, has sort of begun to pull a lot of this revolutionary artwork and poetry together, which is really inspiring stuff. Because for a long time, and I know we're going to cover this later on, but for a long time, people have believed, and the establishments have tried to say that the struggle in Ireland is over. But here you can see coming up from below about revolutionary artwork and poetry and songs that show that it's very much alive. And I too, on behalf of Anti Imperialist Action Ireland, would just like to send our gratitude and our thanks and our mutual support to those comrades such as Lucha and Young Black Maoist and Queer Bolshevik and young Alfie, because this is the work that they're doing is very much as important. Just because they're not in Ireland doesn't mean they haven't got a role to play in the Irish struggle for national liberation and socialist revolution. So to move on to that question and how people can help, I mean, there's a long history of both international solidarity in Ireland with other struggles, and then either our own revolutionary diaspora or other revolutionary comrades from around the world supporting the Irish struggle, and that hasn't really changed. And I think we've already touched on it by talking about the cultural works that people can support us by, including us in their thoughts, in their artwork, in poems and song, and that's all really important, and putting a working class stamp on our own revolutionary culture here. But also in more practical senses, like even all around the world where people are based, wherever they're based, they can be raising the ongoing Irish resistance and the revolution here against British imperialism and other forms of imperialism in their own hometowns, in their own countries. There's a lot of artwork and posters and propaganda being produced by AIA that can be printed and put up all around the world as an act of solidarity. Or there's simple, if people are online, they can be getting involved and sharing our very active Twitter or our Facebook or our Instagram. Or if they want more practical and they want to get in touch with us, they can have wider discussions with us through isrmedia@protonmail.com or by signing up to the Discord server, where they will be able to be put in touch with people from Anti Imperialist Action who can help coordinate some of that international solidarity. And the Discord server, while quite a new venture for us, quite a young venture for us, and it's a lot of young supporters on there too. It's growing very well, and there's a couple of hundred supporters on that now, both in Ireland and around the world, coming together in a community to support national liberation and socialist revolution in Ireland. And that's something that can be easily done by anyone who's on that. But if they're not on Discord, as I say, they can follow us on the Twitter and share that around. They can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and even just, as I say, take an activity in their own community, getting involved in activism. If they're already politically organised, raising the Irish struggle within their own unions or their parties or their organisations. Just to say that yes, the situation in Ireland hasn't changed. There is still a struggle for resistance, and it needs to be supported. There's still Republican prisoners in Ireland that I also encourage our overseas importers to be contacting welfare associations and supporting them and raising the miscarriages of justice that exist within the system here, with both in British occupied Ireland and within the Free State.
Yeah, and there's good information about that as well over on the server. For anybody who's interested, if anyone who's hearing this now, in the description box below this video, you'll find a link to the Socialist Republican Server, and you can learn all about this stuff in there. I think there's a little channel dedicated to the prisoners of war information, and it gives you tips and sort of advice on how you can show support and solidarity for them, and how practically you can actually do that. So you'll find a little bit more information about it in there. And as well as that, of course, you can get involved. I've seen some people are getting involved with perhaps taking some of the artwork and printing that out and putting that up around their own hometowns all around the world. So that's amazing, absolutely amazing to see. And yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of really exciting stuff there. As the comrades who are watching us now can already see, there's already a lot of good stuff going on there, especially on the cultural front. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this grows and develops over time. Now, speaking of this international solidarity, because that's one of the things that you did mention there about people showing that international solidarity from abroad and not forgetting us, not thinking that, okay, the Irish struggle ended with the Good Friday Agreement or something like that, whatever the mainstream narrative they've heard is. In terms of international solidarity, before we proceed into discussing the revolutionary situation here in Ireland today, would you like to take a moment to offer international solidarity with other revolutionary movements for national liberation and socialism across the world today?
Yes, that's a important. International solidarity, proletarian internationalism is a key plank of socialist republicanism and of our own work in Anti Imperialist Action Ireland. We're very aware, and we situate the Irish Revolution firmly within the context of the international, proletarian revolution against imperialism and capitalism. So we see other international revolutionaries around the world very much as our comrades, and we celebrate their victories as much as we celebrate our own. And this week in particular, I would like to send solidarity to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and in particular Ahmed Sadat, the imprisoned General Secretary, who just on the 15th of January this year served the 20-year anniversary of his imprisonment, first by the reactionary Palestinian Authority, and then within the Zionist occupation jails where he remains. And despite being behind bars, Ahmed Sadat is still recognised as one of the key leaders of the national resistance in Palestine. As we know, very similar situation to Ireland, where they're fighting an imperialist occupier out of their land, and the PFLP are important as a secular Marxist revolutionary organisation there, who have who are playing a leading role in the revolutionary situation in Palestine, and have a long-term relationship with Socialist Republicans and with Ireland in general. So this week, the International Organisation for Palestinian Prisoners, Sami Doon, run an annual week of solidarity with Comrade Ahmed Sadat, and that takes place this year between the 15th of January and the 22nd. So that is something I want to flag this week. That is this week, and if people are listening to this stream anywhere in Ireland or anywhere around the world, they can go on to our Instagram or our Twitter or our Facebook, and they can download the solidarity poster with Ahmed Sadat. They can print it out and they can put it up in their own areas or have videos or anything like that, which is very important. And AIA has been involved in that already this week. We've already had solidarity actions with the PFLP in Dublin and Waterford. I think there's a few more that will take place in the course of the week. And I'd also like to send our solidarity to maybe a lesser known struggle in the Irish working class and even internationally, but that's to the League of Poor Peasants in Brazil, who are involved in what is a blossoming agrarian revolution to take back their land from the landowners who seized it from the people, and they're involved in basically organising the redistribution of lands to the peasants in Brazil. And they've been on the go since 1995, and since their formation, they have been stepping up this conflict with the landowners and the all reactionary state in Brazil, basically attempting to build a new power in Brazil for the peasants and for the working class, and it's going from strength to strength. And at the moment, they are involved in some really important work in peasant areas in Brazil, fighting off the reactionary state, and also at the moment where there's a political prisoner, a peasant who's in prison at the moment, and he's in dire need of correct medical attention, which is being denied to him by the reactionary Brazilian state. And his name is Luivaldo, and I would encourage people to be fighting his case and calling for his release, and trying to support him in any way they can, because obviously, as a revolutionary, what the reactionary Brazilian state wants to see is for him to be killed, all behind bars, through neglect, much as how the Peruvian state murdered Chairman Gonzalo on September the 11th through ensuring he didn't receive the correct medical care. So the similar situation here in Brazil at the moment. And as we know, Brazil is under a fascistic military junta at the moment. While it has the appearance of having an elected president, in reality, it's the generals who are still ruling Brazil. So all solidarity has to go to the LCP and the revolutionaries in that country, who are preparing for a much wider revolutionary struggle, which I'm sure we'll be talking about in the months and years to come ahead.
Absolutely. Up the LCP.
That's it.
Yeah, this and actually one of the comrades in the chat just said, "ILL stay fishing," said "Viva la Revolution de Irlanda." I think it's meant to be in Spanish, so I apologise for butchering the pronunciation. Thank you very much.
Well, I wouldn't have a clue either.
Brilliant, yeah, and also just a little moment as well. I think just to say in memory of Kabok as well in the Philippines. So just a little bit of support and solidarity to the NPA who've lost a comrade recently as well. I think that's important to highlight. Okay.
After 10 days of torture or something like that, I think as well.
Yeah. It's absolutely shocking what they're doing to the NPA at the moment. Just really showing the true colours of the Filipino old state, the old fascistic state. Now, that's brilliant. Thanks very much, comrade. I appreciate that. So let's proceed now on to talking about the meat of the conversation now, as we talk about the current revolutionary situation in Ireland. So what is the current revolutionary situation in Ireland now, particularly since the Good Friday Agreement and going into the 21st century? Have people given up on the revolution? Because unfortunately that is the mainstream narrative on this particular moment in time. Would you mind just shining a bit of light on this? Keeping in mind that some of the comrades who are listening to this now probably didn't see the original stream that we did a few months back. And so maybe if you could just give a little bit of context to where we've been in the 21st century in terms of the Irish Republican movement.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. I mean, as you say, well, obviously there's been a long 850-year struggle for national liberation in Ireland since we were first invaded by the Anglo-Normans, who coveted our resources and the wealth and resources of Ireland, and to make our people work for their profit. It's an ongoing situation, as I say, 850 years later. But we probably don't have time to go through every step in the journey that's got us to today. You've mentioned one of the main talking points that's important to get out to people, and that is the 1998 surrender treaty, which was also called the Good Friday Treaty, which people might know it as. And the Good Friday Treaty was an arrangement between British imperialism in Ireland to copper fasten its rule by getting support from its puppet 26 county state here in the Free State, and also the political parties in occupied Ireland, all the unionist parties, but also the constitutional nationalist parties, such as at the time the SDLP, but also the revolutionary, what would have been seen as the Revolutionary Republican movement, represented in the talks by Sinn Féin, who capitulated and agreed to the Treaty of Surrender in 1998, which saw them become vassals, like a surrender grant, where they were given a British Parliament in Stormont, and Sinn Féin would now sit as British ministers in Stormont and administer British rule on behalf of the interests of imperialism in the occupied 6 counties, in much the same way as 100 years ago this year, those who formed the Free State did the same in the 26 county state. And we can talk about a bit more about that at the moment in a minute, because this is also the 100th anniversary of the ongoing counter-revolution across Ireland that suppressed our People's Republic. But just as you say, because there's people who haven't probably heard some of this before. What happened was between 1969, basically 1969, there's been an ongoing struggle, an armed struggle to resist British imperialism in Ireland. But the main years of that were between 1969 and say 1997, when the IRA took its second ceasefire to allow Sinn Féin enter into talks with the British government, and that culminated in the signing of the Good Friday Treaty in 1998, which saw Sinn Féin enter into the British administration. And since then, what has the British and the Free Staters, and including the Shinners, have tried to do is present the national question in Ireland as solved, that the Good Friday Treaty would allow the Irish people reunite when enough of them wanted to do so. But the problem with that is that it's confined to enough of the people in the 6 counties wanted to do so. And as we know, the 6 counties is a gerrymandered British state with an artificially created pro-British majority. So all the media, all the governments alleged governments in Ireland, like Stormont, Leinster House, and the British, and of course their European imperialist partners, have presented the national question in Ireland as resolved, or will soon be resolved through the constitutional process, which when Irish Republicans totally reject this. And what isn't known internationally is, despite that treaty being signed in 1998, the struggle has continued here in various forms. There continues to be resistance in Ireland to the British occupation. But why it's different is that the main vehicle of the national liberation struggle up to that point, capitulated in 1998, and that fractured the movement. So the Republican movement has since then broken up into various different strands, and for different reasons, there are now a number of Republican groups with, all committed to the idea of the rebuilding the All Ireland Republic, but for different ideological or historical reasons, it's ended up into a fractured movement rather than the united movement that arguably existed before 1998. Because before 1998, there was really only Sinn Féin, politically speaking, Sinn Féin and the IRSP, and to some extent Republican Sinn Féin, who also had existed since 1986. But today there is a much wider and larger representation of Republican groups due to that fracturing, which is a massive weakness for the struggle for national liberation and socialist revolution, that there is so much a distance between some of the, or at least perceived distance. But AIA's interpretation and my own interpretation would be there would be more uniting these Republican groups than actually divides them. There's a common goal for driving out British imperialism and all imperialism for Ireland, and to unite around common interests to re-establish the Republic, which I think is very important and something we're going to talk about. But down through the years, the media has deliberately tried to present the question as resolved, and the British have done their work well in dividing the remaining revolutionary Republicans and keeping them divided by all sorts of underhanded and nefarious tactics. But I don't think it would be fair to say that people in Ireland had given up in the revolution. I think many people have been lulled into the false sense that this question is resolved, that we will soon have a united Ireland, which just isn't the case. But the very fact that there are over 50 Republican prisoners still in jails in British occupied Ireland and across the Free State shows that very much the struggle is still alive, and is still ongoing. Certainly it hit a bend in the road with the 1998 treaty, but the last 20 years, which there was a lot of navel gazing for republicanism, I think it's slowly starting to emerge out of that. There's groups, as I say, like the group I'm involved with, AIA, and other revolutionary Republicans who have assessed the situation, have got an ideological line of socialist republicanism, and are now starting to attract a new wave of youth who don't have the baggage of having been involved in the movement pre-1998 or even in the early 2000s, when these questions were pulling republicanism apart, but have a position where they've looked at that and realised the mistakes that have been made, and understand that going forward there can be no compromise with imperialism until we re-establish, the republic. It's just. I don't think once the struggle is under working class leadership, it shouldn't happen. So that is where we are today. Is finding, and it's like there's been a period of intergenerational change in the Republican movement, and it's very much while during the 2000s it might have been seen as becoming the old man's game, and those who were still revolutionary Republicans were finding more grey hairs in their head every year. But now, very much, if you look around at the commemorations, especially AIA's commemorations, it's a much younger group that's coming forward and still believing in the same cause and the same principles that have been driving the movement for over 100 years. Irish Socialist Republicanism, and wanting to find their role in that, and using that to find the answers to their questions today, and just basically building a new and vibrant movement for national liberation and socialist revolution that hopefully we're starting to see happen. Certainly in the last 5 years, it seems to be going that way.
Yeah, it definitely seems to me. I've definitely noticed, how can we say, a change in the winds in terms of young people who were, I suppose, 10 years ago would have been, I don't know, trots or something like that, and they seem to be all gravitating more and more towards the correct political lines. They're developing in Marxism, and developing in Marxism within the Irish context necessarily means dealing with the national question, which necessarily leads them towards Irish republicanism and revolutionary socialist republicanism within that. So there is a very promising move in that direction, which I think I'm feeling very hopeful about, and certainly keeping an eye. Yeah, sorry, go on.
If you take the last 15 years in Ireland, all 32 counties of Ireland, the international imperialism went into a big downturn and recession in 2007, and the collapse around 2007 and 2008, where the shit really hit the fan in Ireland, and the artificially created capitalist so-called Celtic tiger in the 26 counties, and indeed stretching into the occupied 6 counties with the wealth that Britain was experiencing at the time, fell away and fell apart. And the boom to bust cycle that Karl Marx has always spoken about was very evident in people's mind, and that is something that the Free State and indeed Britain has never actually recovered from. So in the 6 and 26 counties here, there has been the ongoing effects of that massive imperialist crash in 2007, 2008, which really hit home to people in communities. There was attacks on the institutions that the working class had been building up over years. On terms and conditions in work, on your social welfare, on your community services. They were all slashed and cut. So the people who are growing up today and looking towards socialist republicanism, so people from 15 into say 25, this age group have never lived in Ireland that had that. Of course, the people who are 25 saw the last of it, but as they reached adulthood, they're living in much harsher conditions than what it was pre 2007, 2008, and in those years, people being socialist republicans were laughed at, saying what's all this about socialism? Like, we have one of the greatest, talking in the Free State, we have one of the greatest economies going. Why would you be promoting socialism? And I think after that 2007 crash, it was very evident that those people who are advocating for socialism and socialist republicanism were completely correct. And our analysis came forward of the boom bust cycle.
Yeah.
And I think that's why younger people now can see that the ideology of social republic is completely relevant to how they're living their lives today and trying to find their way through. And people like Marx and Engels and Lenin and James Connolly, Liam Mellows, Seamus Costello, all these people have written about the society in Ireland, and through their writings and works you can find answers. So I think that's one of the reasons we are seeing and the ongoing deepening crisis in imperialism, which began again to really hit the fan in 2019, just before the COVID pandemic. Imperialism was going into a greater crisis, which in many ways the restrictions that came in around the COVID pandemic have allowed them to have a big patch across the system. The welfare for capitalism in Ireland under the COVID legislation has been absolutely massive. Some some businesses were being paid up to $5,000 a week to keep them afloat during this period, because they didn't want a global health pandemic happening at the same time as a massive push in imperialism. But that's a plaster that's not going to stick. And I think, again, it'll be socialist republicanism that has the answers for people when this inevitable crisis in imperialism deepens and becomes much more, sharp.
Yeah, the phoenix is going to rise again.
Absolutely.
I've seen a few little pieces of art actually recently as well, in terms of the art that's been produced that seems to use that symbolism, and it's very encouraging to see and very apt, I think, especially as you said, with young people who were born into the recession, the dreaded recession at the end of the 2000s, and there's never really been a recovery from that. There's sort of been a pretense.
No.
There's sometimes people try to pretend that we got out of it around sort of maybe 2015, 2016, something like that, but it's never recovered. I mean, even like, do you remember the teachers? Remember the teachers got their salaries slashed? That never came back up,
That's right.
So there's a load of stuff like that, and a lot of people are realizing that they're far worse off than their parents' generations, and so now they're turning towards socialist republicanism as a solution, because unfortunately they found out that during the period of the recession there was a swing towards, I believe, Labour and the sort of social democratic sort of figures, and of course now the working class hates Labour because they were sold out. They became the administrators of austerity in Ireland, and so anytime there's elections now, you just see like a little on the signpost of Labour, like every single one of them is turned into like a little devil, and so people have become totally disillusioned with electoralism in itself, especially when they considered like people like Labour to be the best options they had within that sort of framework. Now I know, of course, people are turning towards Sinn Féin and all that, but well, I suppose we'll have to see where that goes. But I think more and more people are turning towards genuine revolutionary socialist republicanism, and it's great to see this flourishing and developing. Now, come here to me.
Well, I mean, the reality is that imperialism is completely stretched, and particularly at its peripheries, and there's nothing that the electoral or parliamentary system can do to patch this up, because they're only veneer of democracy within imperialism. As we know, the imperialists will do away with that when they have to try and maintain their power. So I think what's promising is, the crisis of imperialism is going to continue to deepen and deepen, and eventually it will be swept away by the rising forces of the revolution. And in Ireland, that takes the form of socialist republicanism. So it's important that socialist republicans have the answers to these questions when people are asking them.
Yeah, absolutely. Community, what we've just been talking about there flows very well into a couple of questions that we had from the Discord server. So rather than wait until after we've gone through them, I think we may just jump into them because they are very much related and very, very tangential to what we were just talking about with regard to the current.
You're happy enough with that on the Good Friday Agreement then, are you? Yeah, and the situation in Ireland. Yeah, happy enough with that. Yeah, okay, no problem.
That was very good. That was a very good summary of the whole situation. Yeah, so I appreciate that. And obviously we'll get a little bit more out of that as we're moving forward with the rest of these questions. I just seen that there's a little super chat there over in the live chat there. That's from Southern Comrades that says, Paul, can you and AIA discuss the popularity of left socialist republicanism in Ireland? Is left and right politics as meaningful in Ireland as in other countries? Why or why not? Now, Seamus, do you want to take that right? And I also want to say thank you, Southern Comrade, for that. Seamus, do you want to take that now, or do you want to take that afterwards? Because we can.
No bother at all taking that now. So the question is, discuss left socialist republican politics.
Yeah,
and also is the left and right divide as prominent in Ireland as it is in other countries?
Exactly.
Did I hear right? Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. So just the popularity of left and socialist republicanism in Ireland, and is the left and right politics as meaningful in Ireland as in other countries? Why or why not?
Well, if we take Irish socialist republicanism was synthesised by James Connolly as his application of the Marxist method to the concrete conditions in Ireland, okay? And this was in the 1890s. James Connolly was first synthesising Irish socialist republicanism, and it has had various representations down through the years. So after Connolly went into he had a party called the ISRP, so the Irish Socialist Republican Party, which is the first Marxist party in Ireland, and it even predates. Well, it certainly comes around the same time as Lenin was talking about the importance of the party of the new type. I know What Is to Be Done wasn't written until 1905, whereas Connolly had the party back in 95 even, might have been the establishing year. I'm not sure 100% about that, but so Connolly was seeing the need for a revolutionary vanguard back at that time, but he ends up being a founding part of the Irish Citizen Army and leading that into the 1916 Rising in a broad front for national liberation. But the reality is that socialist republicanism, since the time of Connolly, has always been the minor form of republicanism, if you want. If you want to look at the Republican movement, there have been two. There's been the broad bourgeois republicanism represented by groups down through the years, such as Sinn Féin, and there's been the Socialist Republican movement, which has always been, although ideologically correct and playing a major role in the struggle, has always been of less prominence. You could say it's in many ways it often played second fiddle to the bigger broad church. But there have been times during our history when socialist republicanism did play a very, very prominent role in the struggle and was very popular. And one of those times was during, well, obviously the 1913 lockout was a major moment for socialist republicanism in Dublin City, when 200,000 workers were locked out by a gang of 400 bosses, and James Larkin and James Connolly took them on, and that is the birth of the Irish Citizen Army. But more so during the Tan War between 1919 and 1921 in Ireland, while the war for national liberation was going on, there was also a blossoming socialist revolution, which saw strikes and Soviets being declared across Ireland as workers began to express their power through socialist republicanism at that time. So only yesterday, I think, was the anniversary of one of the Dublin Soviets, which happened 100 years ago yesterday in 1922, which saw members of the Irish Citizen Army organising the unemployed in Dublin to declare a Soviet, to say, this new free state isn't going to look after us, so we're going to fight it. But even during 1919 to 21, there were many Soviets, like the Monaghan Asylum Soviet, which is very well known, led by an Irish Citizen Army member, Peter O'Donnell, who was also the ITGW organiser at the time, and he organised both patients and staff for better conditions. There was many Soviets down in Munster in particular, like the Knocklong Soviet and the Cork Harbour Soviet. There was a Waterford Soviet. So there was cattle drives and breaking up a big landed estates during the Tan War, all going on at the same time as the struggle for national liberation. And in the mind of the working class, these two were the same. The class struggle and the national struggle were the same. And how this was stopped is the bourgeois Republicans who were in charge of the movement at the time suppressed these Soviets, such as the Limerick Soviet as well, through using an IRA police to prevent this bourgeois socialist revolution. The counter-revolution, as we talked about, was used to suppress the Republic in 1922, because it was very clear from the leaders of that movement, based on the 1919 democratic programme of the First Dáil Éireann, that the Irish Socialist Republic, as said by Liam Mellows, was going to be the People's Republic. And the people that he was talking about were the workers and the small farmers that made up the backbone of the Irish society at the time. It wasn't going to be the William Martin Murphys, who was the leader of the gang of 400 that were going to rule Ireland. It was going to be the workers and the small farmers, the bourgeois. So this is why the counter-revolution had to start 100 years ago, to suppress that rising socialist republicanism, and it did so very, very violently. And as we know, the Free State, using British guns, British uniforms, and even British soldiers, suppressed the Republic and defeated the Revolutionary Republican Army militarily, not politically or ideologically, but certainly militarily, and that suppressed the Socialist Republican movement. But at various times throughout the history between now and then, Socialist Republicanism has flared up again as popular, because it's always sort of just been there in the hearts of the people. And one of the main ones, of course, was 1934 with the Republican Congress, but also the members of the Republican Congress going on to fight against fascism in Spain and in support of the Spanish Republic, was seen very much, and is remembered very proudly in Ireland, that our people went to fight fascism in Europe long before the outbreak of what was called the emergency here, World War II. But that was very much a socialist Republican doing, and a popular expression of socialist republicanism. And then in the 1960s, there was a real swing within the Republican movement towards socialism and towards left republicanism, and it was officially endorsed by the IRA and the Republican movement in 1966, and that was announced by the Baldwinstown speech delivered by Seamus Costello in 1966, where the socialist republicanism of the IRA was set out, and that can be read in Seamus Costello's speech given in Baldwinstown that year, and it still remains one of the best expositions of Irish social republicanism to this day. And again, the whole movement would have been socialist. There's a lot of talk around the split in the Republican movement in 1969-70 that it was over Marxism and socialism, which is not fair. That's a revisionism of the split, because both sides after the split both desired a 32-county democratic socialist republic. That was the objective of both sides of the split. So to write off the formation of the provisionals as an anti-socialist move would be very wrong. And down through the years, obviously, that had remained the desire of the provisionals up until 1998, when they capitulated, was for to see a 32-county democratic socialist republic. So that certainly would have been seen as a popular expression of left socialist republicanism.
Can I just say,
yeah.
Can I just jump in there as well? When people hear that term democratic socialism, it seems to jump out as a little bit strange within the context of, armed struggle and revolution, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
They often wrote it in the text as democratic, socialist, and democratic and socialist republic. So I think that can maybe separate it from people who are thinking that, I don't know, that they just support Bernie Sanders.
They're not talking about. They're not talking about. They're not talking about social democracy here.
Yeah.
It's not like that social democracy wouldn't have been the way people expressed it. It wouldn't have been called that. Democratic socialism didn't come around till much later.
Yeah.
Really, you know what I mean? So what the IRA and Sinn Féin were talking about at the time was a revolutionary republic, which would be both democratic and socialist, and democratic for the working class, obviously, not for the other classes, like, you know what I mean? Which is a very important point to make, Paul, I have to say, because you do see that thrown around as if it was some form of early social democracy and attempt for constitutionalism, but that's just not true. But I was just going to say that another popular expression of social republicanism would have been, the foundation by Seamus Costello and others in 1974 of the IRSP and the INLA, who played very much a part in the war for national liberation from that time until 1997, when then they too took a sort of a no-strike policy after the IRA had gone on ceasefire too. So that sort of ended, as I said, the main well-known war for national liberation here, even though it continued at a lower ebb at that time. And then, by the time of 1998, Socialist Republicanism had to sort of regroup and gather its strength again, because the capitulation by Sinn Féin in 1998 was a massive dent to Socialist Republican, and then obviously there was a lot of fractures and splits after that. So in the 20 years between 1998 till more or less today, Socialist Republicanism had to sort of regrow and refine itself and find new expressions for itself. And I think it's only now that it will be seen to becoming popular again. And how you can see that is every revolutionary Republican group that exists today would consider themselves Socialist Republican and would aim for re-establishing the All-Ireland Socialist Republic. So there wouldn't be too many Republican. Once upon a time, there were Republican groups that said, hold on with your socialism, we'll get national liberation first. I think what's happened in the popularisation of left Socialist Republicanism to this point is that every group that still stands in the field for national liberation called itself a Socialist Republican group, which I think speaks for itself of the popularity for it. And the second part of that question is whether left and right divides are important in Ireland. I think I sort of know where this person is coming from, because for the last 100 years, the Free State has tried to present itself as, slightly different than other countries in the world, because it was dealing with so-called, what they call civil war politics, and that it was divided between, the right and the right through Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. But that is a skewing of the situation in Ireland, because what they call a civil war, we recognise as a counter-revolution. And your left Socialist Republicans were suppressed and forced from the ground by a violent counter-revolution 100 years ago. So no normal politics developed anywhere in Ireland. In the 26-county state, there was this puppet British regime, and in the 6 counties, it was, either periods of direct military rule or the Orange State ruled by the pro-British minority in the occupied 6 counties. So there has been no normal development of politics in Ireland, because we are both a colony and a semi-colony and an oppressed nation and an oppressed people. But the left and right divide is still there, because the Revolutionary Republicans, as I say, are all Socialist Republicans, and the right wing represent very much the current status quo with the occupation and the Free State, so the semi-colonial and colonial nature of Ireland. And this is seen with internationally, there's been a rise of the right in the last few years, with Richard Trump in America and other things like that have Boris Johnson given succor over there in England. And what you've seen here across Ireland is, very small far-right organisations developing, which have always been kept in check by Socialist Republicanism and other anti-fascists. But what the reason I mention them is to say that these people who claim to have, the answers to the issues that we're facing today are all supportive of the status quo in Ireland. So they support the British occupation in the north, and they support the counter-revolutionary 26-county state in the south. So, the right is for, and it's Liam Mello said this in 1922. He said, the treaty people, the right are for imperialism and capitalism, and the Republic stands for the working class. And that's why he coined the phrase that the Irish Republic will be the People's Republic. It is the People's Republic. And I think that sort of says where the popular Social Republican forces stand. Now, in my time, through my time in the Republican movement, at the beginning of my time, Socialist Republicanism wasn't strong. I and the comrades around me were very much strong on Socialist Republicanism through different organisations down through the years as we've come to the day, for me being a member of AIA. But in the last, say, 15, 5 years, I've seen Socialist Republicanism become unpopular again. And it's popular with comrades of my own age and older, but much more so among the youth. The youth that we see today getting involved in Republicanism are very much Socialist Republicans. You know what I mean? They have none of this old traditional, say, just bourgeois or broad church republicanism. It's all very much an understanding of Socialist Republicanism as the history in Ireland. As you know, I'm not saying it's not a mass movement by any stretch, because it's being divided by the treaty in 1998 and the British and Free State action since then. But it is certainly a growing popular movement, and it's there are thousands of people in Ireland who would consider themselves Socialist Republicans, and that can only grow.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant to see. Do you know, when people are sort of talking about the left and right divide with regards to Ireland, the way I like to conceive of it, and Seamus, I'm not sure if you agree with this or not, but the way I always conceive of it is on the left is the anti-imperialists, and on the right are either the pro-imperialists or the collaborators with imperialism, and we absolutely have that here.
Yeah.
And especially as well, if you consider imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism, as of course brought forward by Lenin, then of course we can see that the left-right divide is present here, but it just takes a different form as a result of the particularities of the national situation in Ireland as a colony and a semi-colony of a few different forms of imperialism. Actually, historically British imperialism, but today, obviously British imperialism, European imperialism, and North American imperialism, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it absolutely is there.
That's exactly what I was trying to explain. Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to explain. The divide is there, but the divide is all the left and right divide in Ireland is also the Republican and anti-Republican divide, the anti-imperialist and pro-imperialist divide. They're basically the same divide, and you will find the people who are against the Republican struggle are also the ones who cheer loudest for imperialism and the right wing method of politics.
Yeah, exactly. I suppose it comes down to understanding that the principal contradiction in Ireland is imperialism, rather than the very intense working class consciousness that maybe had in other places that has nothing to do with the national question. It's just that this divide between left and right takes on a different form in Ireland, but the essence is again similar. It's that similar anti-imperialist essence and pro-imperialist or
Our primary
collaborationist essence.
contradiction in Ireland is the national liberation struggle that
Yeah,
continues, the contradiction between an oppressed nation and the oppressor.
exactly.
And that is why anybody who considers himself a socialist has to support national liberation, because, it's only through the national liberation struggle. In Ireland, the national liberation struggle can only be successful through a socialist revolution, and the socialist revolution can only be successful through the national liberation struggle. That is basically the truth of Ireland, and that is how it has to be understood. And that is why, if people are talking about a parliamentary left and right, it's totally irrelevant, because parliamentarism isn't going to give the answers in Ireland that's needed. It's only coming through revolution, because we are an oppressed colony and semi-colony.
Exactly. Very well said. Okay, and again, related, related to these questions, they all seem to be related. There's three questions, James, they're fairly similar. There's a bit of overlap between them. One's come in
Okay.
there's a super chat now that's come in, so I'm gonna read that. I'm gonna read that first, and then maybe I'll touch
Yeah.
on. I might read through the three of them, and then we'll take them one by one. So I'll read through three of them, and then we'll come back to them. We'll take them one by one and go through them and see what the differences are, if there are differences between them. The first one that came in.
Okay.
So Marxism Arianism asked, what is the future of the AIA and how does it deal with other groups with political disagreements? The second one was from Toby 1916 that asked, do AIA advocate for the idea of an anti-imperialist broad front as proposed by Seamus Costello? And if so, what is the stance on electoral participation and what Socialist Republicans should do in elections? And now the final one is from TTV, who asked, I have a question for AIA. Do they support working with other left-wing groups during the revolution, or are they opposed to any cooperation with revisionist or liberal groups? So the main sort of theme that we're coming at here is this connection with other organisations. How does that get brought together with Seamus Costello's idea of an anti-imperialist broad front? What are the positions with regard to that? And of course, Marxism Arianism from the first question asked, what is the future of AIA and how does it deal with other groups with political disagreements? So, do you want to try and sort of take all of them together, or do you want to take it one by one? How would you prefer to approach that?
Yeah, I'll try and take them. I'll try and take them together, and maybe what you can do is, if I don't answer
Then we'll
part of
come
it,
back.
you can bring back into it, because there's a lot to unpack there. There's a few different points in it. So first of all, speaking of Irish social republicanism, first of all, since James Connolly's time, since it was synthesised by Connolly, has always advocated the need for a broad front, an anti-imperialist broad front, and you can see that in Connolly's own writings and in his position with the Irish Citizen Army, leading it into an alliance with bourgeois Republicans and the Volunteers and the IRB to fight in the 1916 Rising. The 1916 Rising was effectively a broad front of Socialist Republicans and bourgeois Republicans, to challenge imperialism. And as the person who asked the question rightly points out, this was further developed by Seamus Costello in the 1970s in a paper called The Anti-Imperialist Broad Front. And Costello sets out very relevant theory and ideology for the broad front at that time, and including a very specific set of core demands that people could unite around in the 1970s to form a broad front against British imperialism in Ireland. And Anti-Imperialist Action Ireland, since our establishment almost 5 years ago, has consistently argued for the need for a broad front in Ireland, for an anti-imperialist broad front that unites all Socialist Republicans and other progressives into the struggle for national liberation, behind the core set of demands that people can unite around for driving imperialism out of Ireland. So absolutely, we advocate the need for a broad front and for working with others where there is common purpose, where there is a unity of purpose on certain demands. So we've been involved in many campaigns, anti-fascism, or things like the water tax, where there would be people that we wouldn't ideologically agree with, but we're united on those ideas, so we can work together on them. We're involved in campaigns against internment and the special court with other groups all of the time. So we do work very well with other groups, particularly other revolutionary Republican groups, but also with individuals and progressive people who don't necessarily share all of our ideology, but can be friends and comrades in the struggle, in certain aspects of the struggle. Um, so the broad front is absolutely advocated by AIA, and as I said, that's for all socialist Republicans. They'd have to be revolutionary Republicans, opposed to the Free State and British imperialism in Ireland, and progressives who want to unite behind that struggle. Because there are progressives in Ireland who wouldn't consider, they might consider themselves socialists, who don't necessarily see themselves as dyed in the wool Republicans. But these comrades still understand that there has to be a national liberation struggle and a socialist revolution. So you certainly can work with them, and it would be our hope that we are only 5 years old. We're a very young organisation, but we have credibility across Ireland and with other organisations, and it's our hope that we can help to bring together an anti-imperialist broad front. But that's not going to happen overnight. That's going to come, as one of the other questions asked, through getting to know and getting to trust, and working with other organisations and individuals on campaigns where we share our opinions. Because if we can work on campaigns together successfully and find that common ground, we can then develop that into a higher level of cooperation, such as what's needed is the anti-imperialist broad front. And I mean, even last year, as a small example of that, we were involved in a campaign ran by Cushta Náisiúnta a Thugta Hain, the Socialist Republican committees in commemoration of the 1981 hunger strike. And that brought together a number of revolutionary Republican groups and individuals who worked together on that specific issue, which is important. But one of the follow-ins to that was, so we do work with other groups, and we're happy to, and we absolutely advocate an anti-imperialist broad front like Connolly and Costello. And then the next question was about electoral participation. Could you remind me of the word of that question, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was Toby 1916, and this was again tied into this question of the anti-imperialist broad fronts. What is the AIA stance on electoral participation, and what socialist Republicans should do in elections?
Okay. Well, anti-imperialist action is totally opposed to electoral participation, and there's a number of reasons for that. As I sort of already outlined, we have here in this country is a semi-colony in the 26 counties and a colony in the north under direct British rule. So you have two puppet parliaments in Ireland, one based at Stormont and one based at Leinster House, who are pro-imperialist parliaments in Ireland, and to contest their elections is to legitimise the partition of our country and the imperialist occupation of our country, which we just do not think it is correct to do. And it's also legitimising the exploitation and oppression of the working class, leading them into an electoral system which is there to serve bourgeois interests and the imperialism. The elections are there to keep the bureaucratic capitalists and the imperialist interest in their money, basically, and to say every 5 years, as Marx says, you can have a chance to vote for who rules you. But in reality, the rulers don't change, and people continue to be oppressed and exploited, and our wages are robbed, our natural resources are robbed, whereas the working class and their allies have the answers to what they need outside of the electoral system. If they were to build up an alternative new form of republican power in Ireland to help rebuild the All Ireland Republic from a local level up, this can be done out. We don't need the electoral system. We need a revolutionary system in Ireland. 100 years of attempting to change the counter-revolution or the states, that pro-British states from within, has failed, and new thinking and a new example is needed, where Republicans try to encourage the working class no longer to vote in the bourgeois elections and to find other forms of alternatives in their own communities to address the issues that they're looking for. And that leads into what we should do in the period of elections. And Anti-Imperialist Action Ireland's position very strongly is that there should be a boycott of bourgeois elections across the country. And that would include, council elections, general elections, which is your elections to, parliaments such as Leinster House and Stormont, obviously to the Westminster elections in the occupied territories, but also to, the European elections. So, and like the likes of a British referendum or border poll in Ireland, we'd also boycott, because we do not see that imperialism and its allies has legitimacy in Ireland to say who is in power. We do not recognise the artificial states in Ireland. We believe that there was an all-Ireland Republic proclaimed in 1916, established on January 21st, 1919, and that was violently suppressed in 1922. So why would we legitimise the suppression of our own country, and instead of fighting and organising for the re-establishment of that country today?
Mm. And can I ask,
That republic.
there's often a question for people, particularly people who I think are quite new to the left, and maybe who maybe haven't been around for the full electoral cycle. So maybe they've got an interest in politics in like the last 4 or 5 years, so they haven't actually seen the full cycle go through in terms of electoral politics and the effects that it actually has. A lot of these people will say, well, look, why don't we just participate in elections? We know that the elections isn't going to deliver the Socialist Republic, but why can't we use these, or why don't we use these as amplifiers for our movements? And so this is a question, and I always get asked this all the time. People always come at me asking this question. And so what would be the response then that AIA would have to that? Would you see that there may be better alternatives to spreading the message, or how would you approach that? Because this is a question that I always get asked, and the response that I always think, the response that I always have is that, well, look, like, we're living in the age of the internet now, and it's very easy to get the message out there using online means, or even if it is, for example, people saying, look, let's go around and knock on doors and let's talk to people and all that sort of thing. The same sort of benefits that you'd have from actually running in the election, you can get from just doing that but not running in the election. Do you know what I mean? If that's the point is that
the elections under capitalism are an absolute distraction, and they are a pressure valve for the system, where, you know, would-be reformers lead the working class up the garden path, saying, if you elect me, I'm going to do this, that, and the other. I promise you this, that, and the other, and inevitably are unable to do what they say, because the system is not designed to be changed from elections. Elections are there to strengthen the system, and, you know, as I say, this pressure valve where people say, oh, sure, look, I'll wait till the next time and we vote them out. Oh, get them out, but you're not changing. All you're doing is, the famous saying is, changing the deck chairs. The rulers remain the same, and the class interests that are ruling the society remain the same. So elections are an absolute distraction to a revolutionary and for a revolution in Ireland. And the reason for that is the time that you are wasting on resources and manpower to fight elections could be used to build up a revolutionary Republican alternative in the country. And what I mean by that is, we would, as Anti Imperialist Action has advocated since 2017, when we were established, we need to see a new system of alternative Republican power built across Ireland, which begin at a very local level in communities through what we call the establishment of resistance committees to come together, start organising the working class in their area, you know, building up the strength of working class alternatives, becoming centres of resistance, and then becoming your revolutionary people's councils outside of the system, that the working class themselves in their own areas can start to find the solutions to anything that they need, anything that they're currently using so-called elected politicians for. The people can actually do themselves, and the people can be shown to do themselves, because the working class are the ones with the inherent power in this country, while the system will tell them that they don't. We as revolutionaries know that they do, and that needs to be encouraged constantly within the working class. And after that, these revolutionary councils can be linked up across the country to begin forming the institutions of the All-Ireland Republic today. Functional institutions suppressed for 100 years can be reformed and win the working class's allegiance away from the puppet states in Ireland to the All-Ireland Republic, winning away from the British imperialist system and the Free State system to the All-Ireland Revolutionary Socialist Republic. And that will not happen while people continue to put their faith in those who are standing for elections. And that's not to say that everyone who stands for election is tied to the system, or doesn't feel that they're doing the right thing to try and reform these things, and don't play, a progressive role at times. And, there's some very genuine people in Ireland involved in electoral politics. I'm not saying that there isn't, but I'm saying well, that's a long time ago. Even today, I'm sure there are. But what I'm saying is, it's a distraction from the need to build a revolution in the here and now. And what I'm saying is, some people will call, it's too hard for people. How are we going to do that? we'd be starting from scratch all over again. But that is what is necessary. And what I say to those people is, for 100 years since the counter-revolution began, Irish Republicans have attempted, on many occasions, to go in to parliaments and change from the inside, and they have always inevitably been sucked in to the system that they're trying to overthrow. And we can see this most recently with Sinn Féin, entering Stormont and Leinster House and becoming very much part of the system. Like, Sinn Féin are now very much part of the establishment in Ireland. As much as people don't want to hear that, that's what they are. And that's why all the media is getting behind them. They recognise the Gardaí, and they recognise the PSNI, and they recognise the British Army in the north of Ireland, and they even recognise the special court which has been used to intern revolutionary Republicans in the Free State. They've even given that its support. So, the inevitable thing of needing to maintain their seats and sucking them in, they're leaving working class communities, and they, having led them up the garden path, and they've gone in part and parcel to the system. So what AIA is advocating, and what I'm saying tonight, is what Republicans need to do is build outside of the electoral system, as hard as that is, and it's not going to be easy, because we have to convince the working class that we're not just going to be another, get down the line a bit further and we're going to say, oh, sure, we'll stand for election now. Like, we're ruling out from the beginning, AIA is totally opposed to elections in, the bourgeois and capitalist system in Ireland. We want to see an alternative working class power structure emerge, and we're very committed to building that with like-minded people, because we're not going to do it by ourselves. And that's where a broad front will come in, and that's where mobilising the revolutionary working class will come in.
Very good, and that ties in, I think, some of the other questions there, or I suppose within that question, some of the other comments. With regard to the other two comments, or the other two questions that were there, what's the future for AIA, and how does it deal with other groups with political disagreements? And then the other one, do they support working with other leftist groups during the revolution, or are they opposed to any cooperation with revisionist or liberal groups? Did you want to speak to that a little bit more, and any sort of potentials with regards to cooperating with groups who maybe have some misconceptions about these kinds of topics that we're talking about right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said at the beginning, we advocate the anti-imperialist broad front, but we'd be advocating what revolutionary Republicans and progressives who are already opposed to the states that exist in Ireland. And, revolutionary Republicans in Ireland would be opposed to elections, because they have always held an abstentionist position from Leinster House and Stormont anyway. But in terms of liberal and reformist groups, which I think the question is really referring to, AIA would see possibilities to work with them on common issues, as I already mentioned. So in the likes of anti-fascism, there are going to be people who believe in all sorts of things, but are opposed to the rise of the far right, and we can work together on that. In single issue campaigns, such as abolition of the special court, against the internment of Republican prisoners, against things such as the water tax or the carbon tax or the household tax, or in resisting climate change and environmentalism. These are all areas that we can work with people who don't 100% agree with us, but there would not be necessarily a role within the anti-imperialist broad front, as we advocate, for those that are still tied to the states and to the British and Free State system in Ireland. We would have to win the debate with them that they have no role, that such states have no role to play for the working class, because in reality those people are leading the working class up the garden path, and that needs to be explained. Now, in terms of the question about people that we have disagreements with, I don't quite understand what that means. Does it just mean how do we deal with political disagreements?
I think that's pretty much it. Yeah. So I think I'd use the electoral question as the example for that. So for an organisation that supports running in elections or something like that, how do we approach them? And all things being equal, how would we?
Yeah, well, as I say, we lay out our stall very clearly about where we stand on all of those issues, and we don't try to hide where we stand on that issue. And we're very clear with people, so people know what they're getting when they're working with AIA, and they know that we are, a revolutionary Republican, Socialist Republican organisation. So when we don't hide that, people can work with us when they want. But if there are people who we have major disagreements, as I say, they still can work together on issues of common ground. So it could be on workers' issues, or as I gave an example of, environmentalism or anti-fascism, we're going to be working with people who we're not agreeing anywhere else, but we still have a common enemy that we can unite against.
Very good. I think that pretty much covers all the questions, and I think we're pretty much good to go in terms of proceeding with the rest of the conversation. Maybe, Seamus, we'll push through the next couple of questions that we have from our own sort of little script, and then
No problem.
we'll take a few more Q&As after that, and then we'll see how we're getting on there.
Yeah, I'm happy enough.
So then, I suppose related to these questions, and we may have covered this already, and I think you may have touched on this already, with regard to resistance committees and all that sort of stuff. But what are the main tasks for revolutionaries in Ireland today to advance the struggle for national liberation and socialism?
Well, one of the main tasks, first of all, is highlighting and advocating and convincing people that there is still a struggle for national liberation in Ireland, and that issue isn't solved. That the primary contradiction in Ireland is still between the oppressed and the oppressor, and in the struggle for national liberation, to remove British imperialism, and as you said earlier, also all forms of imperialism from Ireland, whether it be North American, British, or European. And I think that's a very big priority, is to highlight this. And I think that is happening both through AIA and the workers from other Republican organisations. People can see that there is still a revolutionary Republican struggle in Ireland. But one of the main then tasks would be, we need to rebuild, and we are rebuilding, a vibrant, militant, all Ireland Socialist Republican movement, that can give a successful challenge to imperialism and rebuild the All Ireland Republic. And also, as part of that, is to establish an anti-imperialist broad front, uniting all Socialist Republicans and progressive forces behind the same demands. Now, that's not saying that it's a unity project where all current groups have to become the same organisation. I don't think that's either wanted or needed. It's a broad front, recognising the autonomy of groups, recognising their organisational independence, but saying where we agree on the struggle for national liberation and social revolution, let's work together in a coordinated way, because our enemies are united against us, and we need to be united if we're going to win in this struggle. And in terms of trying to rebuild the Republic side by side with rebuilding the Republican movement, absolutely we advocate the building of alternative working class power structures and the institutions of that Republic in the here and now. We don't have to wait till the victory of the struggle to start building the Republic. That can start now through, as AIA advocates, resistance committees, centres of resistance, and the Revolutionary People's Councils. So they very much are the task. But I think, first of all, getting it out there to people that the struggle is still continuing, and organising a very strong movement all across the country, rooted very much in the working class communities and the working class, the small farmers, and other allies across the country is a key priority in the time ahead.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think that covers it pretty well and pretty succinctly. Now, there's one more question that I had with regard to recent events before we push forward into the Q&As. There's one more question of something that came quite recently, and I know there was an article about this over on AIA's website. AIA recently published an article about the tragic, senseless, and entirely unprovoked murder of the 23-year-old Aisling Murphy, excuse me, that happened last week. So if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about this situation and what's being done now in order to prevent horrific events like this from happening again.
Yeah, well, it's been an absolutely shocking time here in Ireland with the murder of Aisling Murphy, and I just think I want to extend our condolences to our family and our friends, and indeed our community, and nearly everybody in Ireland has been touched by this. But I don't want to talk too much about that situation, because I'm very conscious that it's a young girl who's been robbed from her family and her community, and I think there's still a period of grieving there, and it's certainly not something that I want to do any grandstanding on. But I think it reflects a much wider problem that I do want to talk about, which is the ongoing and the almost rising violence in Ireland against women, which is just something that's totally unacceptable and needs to be addressed. And it's not going to be addressed unless we have these types of conversations. And unfortunately, Aisling Murphy's tragic and senseless murder is just yet another in a line of attacks and killings of women in Ireland. And just a couple of weeks before in Dublin, in Ballyfermot, there was a young 17-year-old girl, Alana Quinn, which is basically attempted murder. She was beaten very, very brutally by a gang of four men in Ballyfermot, left, put in hospital and, really damaged, potentially can't see again. Really a horrific attack just a couple of weeks before the murder of Aisling Murphy. And then before that, there has been a rise in attempted date rapes again through a spiking craze that has been going on across Ireland, which has seen, absolute scumbags attempting to, isolate women and drug them using syringes to, basically attack them and to do all sorts. This is just a recent point. If you look into Irish history, there's an ongoing attack on women down through the years, whether it was first by the state and the Catholic Church, now today, unfortunately, through the wider community, and it just needs to be spoken out against. And what, if you mean what we as AIA are doing about that, obviously we are a proletarian feminist organisation that upholds, women's liberation and women's rights and the women's struggle as very much a key plank of the struggle against imperialism, the Socialist Republican struggle in Ireland. It was women 100 years ago and before who were very much, the main drivers of the establishment of the Irish Republic and of its defence. 100 years ago when the counter-revolution took place, it was the women who spoke hardest and strongest against the Treaty of Surrender in 1922. And, Social Republicans have always seen that women have a leading role to play in our struggle. And I suppose taking inspiration from struggles around the world, liberation struggles, what needs to happen in Ireland is for an organised Socialist Republican popular women's organisation to develop. And I'm not saying that if women were more organised, that they wouldn't be attacked, because unfortunately these random attacks can't be stopped. They can't be prepared for. Aisling Murphy, for example, was out going for a run. How do you protect anybody against that? But what it can do is it can challenge these, misogynistic ideas in society that sees this, low key culture of, underlying comments made against women and small attack. Oh, just brush it off. That's just lad behaviour. This type of thing. Can be challenged in a very concerted and active way, and I think Republicans have a very big role to play in that. And at the moment within AIA, what we're trying to do is in promoting of proletarian feminism, we are currently organising a study group, a reading group for people to read a document called The Philosophical Trends of the Feminist Movement, which is written by one of the leading of proletarian feminism, Anuranga Gandhi, out in, she was a member, a cadre of the Communist Party of India, Maoist, who actively organised women's movements within the revolutionary movement in India, similar to, the work of the Communist Party of Peru and the popular women's movement there, organising women basically to confront, patriarchal abusers, misogynists. And in Ireland, we had a very proud history of the likes of Cumann na Mban and the Irish Citizen Army in particular, where women played a full combat role. And down through the years, in the IRA or Sinn Féin, women would have played a very prominent role. And again today, we need to see women coming forward and seeing the revolution and the struggle for national liberation as a way with dealing with the ongoing women's questions that exist, because the women's movement should be very much part and parcel of the women's question. Liberation should be very much part of the national liberation and, of course, our own working class liberation. They can't be separated for Socialist Republicans, and it's just something we need to advocate. But again, as I say, I don't want to go into too much of that detail, so I'm very conscious that there's a family and a community really, really grieving at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely, brilliant. And for comrades who are interested in that reading group, I believe the email that you mentioned earlier, isrmedia@protonmail.com. If you just need that, that's in the description box below. Just below this video, you'll find that email address. So people who are interested in attending that reading group and maybe getting involved, they can send off an email to that and register their interest, I suppose.
They can send an email to register their interest, but also if they have ideas around the establishment of a similar type thing of a popular women's movement in Ireland, or how that could be done, we're very much interested in hearing from women on that. Like, it's not for us to be telling women what they need to do, and they have, like the working class, they have the answers themselves.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. From the masses to the masses. Brilliant. One thing that you mentioned with regards to patriarchal violence, you mentioned the Catholic Church, which I think is very interesting. We talk about the mother and baby homes and all that sort of stuff, the laundries and so on and so forth. There was a question in the Q&A, particularly regarding the Catholic Church, which I think might be useful to talk about next. And the question was, what is AIA's position towards the Catholic Church and other religious institutions in Ireland? And it might be useful just as well to talk about the position with regard to religious institutions, and then the position with regard to religion, and whether there are any differences there. But come here to me, Seamus. I actually need to run to the bathroom. I'm famous for having a very bad bladder. So do you mind if I just run to the bathroom quickly and you take that question?
No, I'm quite happy to talk away.
Okay.
No worries.
All right, I'll be back in a minute then if you want to fire away with that, and then I'll try and catch up when I'm back.
Yeah, well, I mean, AIA is a Socialist Republican organisation, as we say, so we're a secular organisation, and we don't favour any particular religion, but we believe as Republicans in the words of the 1916 proclamation in civil and religious liberties, which means we uphold the rights of all to practice their religion, or indeed to have no religion. And I think that's a very important point to make about republicanism, because it's often presented in the media and certainly internationally as a Catholic philosophy in Ireland, that Irish Republicans necessarily have to be Catholic, and that's not true at all. It's very outdated, and indeed the founders of republicanism in Ireland, bourgeois republicanism, were Protestants, either Anglicans or Presbyterians, who were inspired by the French Revolution and brought this ideology into Ireland. Theobald Wolfe Tone, Napper Tandy, Henry Joy McCracken, all Protestants, who organised the first Republican movement, the United Irishmen, which united Catholics and Protestants. And Wolfe Tone, who's considered the father of Irish republicanism, said that his aims and objectives were to unite the people through the common name of Irishman instead of the denominations Catholic, Protestant, and Dissenter. And I think that is something that republicanism would always uphold. And today you could add into that we want to unite the replace the unite the Irish people in place of the denominations, Catholic, Protestant, Dissenter, Muslim, Jew. It doesn't matter what religion somebody is, if they're part of the Republican struggle and the Irish nation. But of course, because the way Ireland has been historically, with the periods of invasion and occupation and religion, religion has been used by imperialism as an attempt to divide the Irish people from each other. So while all the religions that exist in Ireland today are foreign imports, from Catholicism right through to Protestantism, Judaism, Islam, all foreign imports into the Irish country. We, as I say, recognise civil and religious liberties for people to recognise and worship whichever God they want, or none. But historically, there's been two main religions in Ireland, which are Catholicism and Protestantism. And the Protestantism was seen as the English religion in Ireland. It was brought by the colonisers, the Anglo settlers, into Ireland, and it was used to divide the people down through the years from the Catholic so-called Irish and the foreign Protestants. It's basically what was done, and this is why people associate republicanism with Catholicism. And when you had the counter-revolution here 100 years ago, the Free State and the bourgeois adopted the Catholic Church in the Free State as an unofficial official state religion, basically. And the Catholic Church was very, very, very powerful in the Free State, while Protestantism was very, very powerful in the occupied 6 counties. And the 6 counties had the orange institutions and things like that, which was known as playing the orange card in Westminster. If you wanted support from Ulster Unionism, you played the occupation and the orange card, and this has continued to divide people down to today. But the role that the Catholic Church has played within the Free State in the last 100 years has been thankfully now declined, but very, very poisonous role within the community, because the priest was basically the most powerful person in society up until the 1990s, I would argue. Although it was waning probably from the 70s on, with new wave of things that came in, international examples maybe from 68 of the early revolutions. From that time on, these ideas coming into Ireland, the power of the Catholic Church was declining. But before that, from 1922 until the 1990s, the Catholic Church was very, very powerful, and basically the all-dominant religion in Ireland. And unfortunately, the Catholic Church can be viewed very much as an anti-women institution in Ireland, because while women played a major role in our revolution, once the counter-revolution kicked in, women were told to return to the home and the kitchen and to raise the children. So almost Hitlerite view of Kinder, Kirche and Kulche, which was children cooking, and I can't remember exactly what church was what Hitler told women to be doing. In Ireland, it was very, very similar by the Free State, that women were to be seen and not heard, and back in the home, and the husband was the representative of that family. And what happened is, the Catholic Church, if women were fall pregnant out of wedlock, they were basically imprisoned and the children taken off them in an awful system called the Magdalene Laundries, which I probably don't have time to go into all of that now, but it's very much the power that the Catholic Church had was corrupted by the Free State, and they took it out on the working class in particular, and women especially in society here. But that doesn't mean that what I'm saying should be seen as anti-Catholic, because as Republicans and as a secular organisation, AIA uphold civil and religious liberties of all. It's just historical fact that the abuses of Catholic Church have dominated the Free State down through the years.
Absolutely, it's important, of course, that we're pointing at the institution of the Catholic Church rather than people's individual leanings towards Catholicism or whatever it may be. And I think it's very important that you highlighted that, and I suppose the institutional abuse.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the institution of the Catholic Church has been responsible for the child sex abuse scandals in Ireland, although there was some of it also in the Protestant churches too. The Magdalene Laundries, the mother and baby homes, as they're also known as, where bodies have been found of both women and babies, and then also just in terms of how divorce, artificial contraception, abortion, these issues which mainly affected women, and women in violent relationships were told by their priest to suck it up and go home. Like, you know what I mean? This is just how it played out in Ireland, and it's very wrong. And unfortunately, as I said earlier, Paul, while you weren't with us, while the power of the church has steadily declined, it does still exist, and it is still here in Ireland. Mainly in the 26 county state, but there are religious hospitals to the north too. But education and healthcare is still very much in the hands of the Catholic Church, and there are moves to change that north and south. But it needs to be accelerated, because no religious institution should be in control of something as important as health and education. And now I mean any religious institution, whether it would be Catholicism, Protestantism, Judaism, or Islam, or anything else. But as I say, those other religions are much smaller in Ireland.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there was definitely a shift, I suppose, over the course of the 1990s. You could actually feel a weakening, and there was a bit of an uprising, I suppose, with regard to the referendums in the mid 2010s, with regard to marriage equality, with regard to abortion, all that sorts of stuff. There was kind of another whimpering out kind of wave of influence that they'd had, and of course with regard to abortion, that caused a lot of issues with regard to hospitals and stuff like that, and because of course the hospitals that would be providing abortions,
of course, disgracefully,
unfortunately the Catholic Church wasn't allowing, so that caused a lot of issues, and it continues to, so these remnants are still there, and like, we don't have separation of church and state here, so we need to really advance that, I suppose. Related Related to this question of religion, and I think it almost directly related, Comrade Lucha Liberation, of course, brilliant artist, asked, are there any contradictions in Irish society that the UK exploited or continues to exploit in order to prevent Irish unity?
Yeah, and I'd just like to give a shout out to Lucha and thank them for the work they've been doing with AIA and as you say, the absolutely excellent revolutionary artwork that they have been producing, and long may it continue. We're delighted to see that solidarity, and we hope we can extend solidarity to the First Nations too, which I know is an issue very close to that artist's heart in the Turtle Island, better known as today as the North American continent. But yes, I think you've hit the nail on the head there in terms of religion has been used as a contradiction by British imperialism to divide the Irish working class. The Protestant colonisers and the Catholic natives, as they'd like to paint it, as simply as that this is two warring tribes, and the Brits have to step in to keep them apart, which we know is totally untrue. And as I explained earlier, the founders of Irish republicanism were actually Protestant, so that soon takes a knife to that lie. But that would certainly be one of the main contradictions used by Britain. But also at the moment there's an interesting one, which is the Brexit, contradictions around Brexit, which are being used by the Brits to maintain the occupation of Ireland, and they're threatening to trigger Article 16, which would see the current situation where the six counties is all but within the European Common Area, and meaning that there's no hard British border in Ireland, reversed, where the Brits would then have to put up, or the Brits and the EU would have to put a hard land border where the illegal British border is. And this is going to be a big contradiction to see if that happens, because obviously while they're trying to play down the national question in Ireland and say it's resolved, if there was to be, because there is still a British border in Ireland, as we know, because the country is occupied and partitioned, but it's there's no checks, there's no it's a seamless border. You just drive through Ireland, and for all intents and purposes, there isn't one, but we know there is, and the occupation is still there. And if they trigger this contradiction around Brexit, that means the hard border would have to be put up. And I think if there was British customs and British soldiers back on the border just up the road here in between Louth and Armagh, between Donegal and Derry, between Fermanagh and Monaghan, it will be bringing home to people that the national liberation question is really still alive and kicking.
Yeah, there's unfinished business. Let's see.
Exactly.
Very good. Thank you very much. Moving on to, I suppose, more cultural aspects now. A comrade called Well, that's the name of the comrade, asks, what is AIA's position on how Socialist Republicans should engage with the Irish language? Also, how should Socialist Republicans engage with other aspects of Irish culture, such as Gaelic games and traditional music?
Very good question from Well. And as Martin O'Coin, the Irish Socialist Republican and the Irish language activist, said, Isi atgoal na Heran, atgoal na Gaeilge, Isi atgoal na Gaeilge, atgoal na Heran, which basically means the reconquest of Ireland is the reconquest of the Irish language, and the reconquest of the Irish language is the reconquest of Ireland. So what that is in saying in that is there cannot be a revolution in Ireland without the popularising of Irish once again as the main spoken language, because for generations, for thousands of years, we spoke our own language in this country, which the English then came into the country and took away from us, robbed out of our own mouths through the national school system, making Irish children speak English and beating them if they didn't, starting in the 1800s, after the great genocide of 1845 to 1852. The national school system came in, and this is how the English removed the Irish language from our mouths. And it was very much part of the colonialism and imperialist control in Ireland, because they felt if they could take the Irish language away from the people, they could make them basically English. And that didn't happen, of course, because we know resistance has continued, but the language did decline due to the genocide and due to this national skills. But Republicans have always supported the promotion of Irish, and AIA really supports the promotion of Irish. I mean, we produce documents in Irish. We have weekly Irish language classes for our members. We, take part in Irish language activism, and some of the issues that are needed for Irish language we're to the fore on. But we also just try to use Irish in our everyday struggles, whether it's on our placard, our leaflets, at our meetings. We promote the use of Irish as much as a person has. Through our classes, we advocate that our membership do try to learn Irish, because if we really want to remove the influence of imperialism, it has to be cultural too, and we have to go back to our own language. Because when you can speak Irish, you think in a different form as you do think in English. And I think that's very worth considering. We have a wealth of literature and history that's only available in the Irish language, and so people are cutting themselves off from that type of real understanding without our own language. And the very fact that it was robbed by imperialism from us is an even greater reason that we should want to take it back. But to answer well, absolutely, most Irish Republicans, and in particular AIA, believe that the Irish language needs to be promoted as learning the Irish language is an act of revolution, and it should be done, and it should be promoted as the vernacular of the country again. In terms of the next one was culturally, absolutely, we believe in promoting Irish culture as a act of resistance to imperialism, because what imperialism wants is one monoculture across the whole world, possibly in the English language. So Anglo-American pop culture, as I've often heard it referred to. So promoting them, cultures of the oppressed, the minority cultures, is an act of resistance. And Ireland has a wealth of culture through either our music, and as you've mentioned there, our GAA, our games, and absolutely Republicans should be supporting them as a stand against imperialism. Not because there's anything superior or about our culture, but because it's an act of resistance against imperialism to maintain your mother tongue and your mother culture.
Definitely, it weakens the chains, loosens the chains of imperialism. Brilliant. Now, speaking of the of course, you mentioned the organization. Within the organization, there are weekly Irish language classes. There's some confusion, I believe, with regard to the nature of AIA, and I believe it's been described as a mass organization. So, if you wouldn't mind telling the comrades, what is a mass organization exactly?
Yeah, AIA is a Socialist Republican mass organisation, and what that means is it is an organisation for the masses who believe in Socialist Republicanism. It's not a political party; it's a revolutionary organisation. It doesn't aim to be a political party. It's an organising for mobilising people into activism and into the struggle for national liberation and social revolution. And basically, anybody who upholds the ideology and the principles of Irish Socialist Republicanism, and good character, over 15, can join AIA and take their part in that revolutionary organisation.
Brilliant. So that's the idea, that it can connect with the masses. It's not like an underground thing. It's above ground. Everybody can apply and can get involved if they're interested, and they adhere to Socialist Republicanism, over 15, and good character.
Yeah, it's an organisation, as you say, for mobilising the masses into the struggle for national liberation. I mean, a mass organisation doesn't mean it's a huge organisation, which people often try to suggest. It means that it's an organisation made up of, organised by, ran by, all the decisions taken by the masses, by the working class in Ireland. It's an organisation basically for taking that working class resistance and challenging it into the struggle for national liberation and socialist revolution. It's not a political party, as I say. It's a revolutionary organisation.
Okay, very good. That's clarified now. Thank you very much. Now, we were talking, of course, obviously we've been talking all about the Irish national question, the Irish national struggle. We talked about the Irish language and so on and so forth. Queer Bolshevik had a very, very good question, very interesting question. And the comrade asked, what exactly does AIA believe about the national questions of each of the other Celtic nations? So the other ones that aren't Ireland, of course. The comrade also says, I know it supports self-determination, but is there anything specific to how the Irish liberation struggle relates to, say, the Welsh or Scottish?
Yeah, well, I mean, that is a very good question, because I think often it's forgotten that Ireland is not the only Celtic nation. There are quite a number of them, and all of them are currently oppressed by other imperialist nations. So you have Ireland, Scotland, Wales, the Isle of Man, and Cornwall, who are directly oppressed by British imperialism. And then you have Brittany, which is oppressed by French imperialism. And there's an argument to say that, some people think Galicia in currently oppressed by Spain is another Celtic country. And as Socialist Republicans, we recognise the right of all Celtic nations to national self-determination and sovereignty and independence. So we believe that the Celtic nations should be free from imperialist occupation and control, and that Ireland, Scotland, Wales, the Isle of Man, Cornwall, Britain should all be free, secular socialist republics. And that has always been the position of the Republican movement down through the years, that the Celtic nations should be free. At one point, long time ago, England was a Celtic nation, but obviously through the waves of colonisation and things that came in England, it's no longer Celtic. The original Britons went into Wales and into Brittany. That's where the name Brittany comes from. And they were the Britons, the Britons, if you want. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. But we see the need for not just Ireland to be an independent social republic, but Scotland, Wales, the Isle of Man, as I say, Cornwall, and Brittany. And not many people realise that there are national liberation movements and certainly independence movements in all of these countries, whether it be Scotland, where people do know, because there's been a growing tide towards independence in Scotland, which is very much supported by Socialist Republicans. Wales has a growing independence movement. But even the Isle of Man and Cornwall have independence movements, and they have demands for independence. And the Isle of Man is interesting because it's not actually part of the so-called United Kingdom. It's outside of the EU, and always was, even when Britain was considered a member state of the EU. The Isle of Man wasn't; it was outside of it. So it shows that it does have its own independent history as a nation. And the same with Cornwall isn't constituted like the other counties in England. There's a separate relationship there where it's actually, I think they call it the Duchy of Cornwall, or it certainly was one, and it has a some more autonomy than other just ordinary counties in England would have, because there is this Celtic history and language and desire for independence in these countries, and Brittany in particular in France has always had a national liberation struggle, and indeed that has like Wales at times, and the Isle of Man has been an armed campaign for independence in Brittany, and this has always been supported by Irish Republicans. And what some would advocate for is almost a alliance of independent socialist Celtic nations working together, like they would have historically, which would be interesting to see. But as we know, the liberation movements in the various Celtic countries are at different phases, with Ireland and Scotland certainly being the most advanced, and Scotland, coming up very strongly at the moment towards independence. And there's different material conditions in Ireland and Scotland, but their independences of both of equal right to national sovereignty and independence. And the same, Wales might, when Scotland eventually does go the route of independence, maybe it'll be the first Celtic nation to win its independence, because it's slightly different than the conditions in Ireland. I think you'll see a rising tide of Welsh independence movement, and even Isle of Man and Cornwall as that so-called United Kingdom breaks up. But definitely, to say to the queer Bolshevik, the AIA firmly and fully supports the right of not just self-determination but independence for all the Celtic nations.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
And we have comrades. We have comrades in all of those Celtic nations that we are in touch with, and that we keep a line open with, that we advocate Celtic nations' independence, and we support the struggles in all the Celtic nations. But it's, as we say, it's for those people to decide the level of determination they want. We tend to support those who are Socialist Republican and advocating the need for independent Celtic republics.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Yeah, people are always, I suppose, taken a little bit off guard by this particular question, because they sort of think of anywhere that they would see as being part of the European continent as just this I don't know, some people see it as just like an imperialist bloc, and they don't realize that there are these oppressed nations within that. And I think it's always
Very much so.
it's very worth it's worth teasing this question out a bit more and helping people to understand that that's maybe people have been misled. Maybe there are semi-colonies all over the place that we're not really quite aware of, And so, yeah.
And in the same line, we should give a shout out as well, though not Celtic nations. There certainly, oppressed colonies within Europe to, Catalonia, the Basque Country, and Corsica, who have always had, well, particularly the Basques, and well, all the three have long histories supporting the Irish Republican struggle and the Irish Republican supporting their fights for independence, and that continues to this day. So, along with the Celtic nations, we would, of course, like to see the independence of Catalonia, the Basque Country, and Corsica.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Now, we had a question from TTV earlier. I think that this is probably pretty fleshed out, but if there's anything else you wanted to add to it, now is the time. The comrade asked, I have a question for AIA. It said the AIA. I think AIA is getting called the AIA a lot, which is interesting. Do they follow a general ideological or political line?
We do, and our ideology and political line is the line of Irish Socialist Republicanism, as first synthesised by James Connolly when he was applying the revolutionary Marxist method to the concrete conditions in Ireland, and obviously that's been developed over the years down to today. But AIA ideology is Irish Socialist Republicanism, and that's what we encourage to join AIA. Those people who uphold the idea of a socialist republic here in Ireland. That's our ideological and political line.
Brilliant. Thanks very
much. It's
both
our ideology and our guides.
Okay, very good. We've got 3 or 4 more questions here now, and coming into a big one actually that I mentioned in a couple of places when promoting this, and very topical at the moment as well, as people will know with regard to the reports. He asked, question for Anti Imperialist Action. Do they have anything to add to the police ombudsman report of, quote, collusive behaviours between loyalist terrorists and the British police?
Well, I mean, it's never been a secret that loyalist death squads were an unofficial arm of the British state in Ireland, and collusion is not something new for Republicans. We have always understood that the British state used loyalist death squads to maintain a terror campaign against the Irish people. Openly so, the loyalist death squads are armed, trained, and controlled by MI5. There's absolutely no question about this. And the paramilitary police force in the north, the occupied 6 counties, the RUC, PSNI, is under the control of MI5 just as much as the loyalist terror gangs, and the police force in the 26 county state, the so-called Garda Síochána, are controlled by MI5, and the commissioner of the Free State Police, called Drew Harris, is an MI5 asset who is a former RUC officer and who was involved in all the cover-ups of loyalist terror gangs, going back to the famous infamous Glenanne gang. And that Drew Harris is still involved in the cover-up of the actions of, the collusion between MI5 and the RUC and the loyalist terror gangs, and even the Dublin and Monaghan bombings in 1974 was an act of collusion between the British state and loyalist terror gangs, which killed people in both Dublin and Monaghan, and no one has ever. The British have never told the full story about that, and indeed they won't, because the files have been sealed almost indefinitely. There has never been justice, and there can't be justice while the occupation continues for those families who lost people in the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. But there's many more cases like that. I mean, there's the Miami Show Band. There's in particular the Glenanne gang, and I'm sure people have heard a lot about them in recent times. But even the likes of Billy Wright, who would be a well-known loyalist, a leader of the LDF, he was a British agent who was being ran by MI5 to carry out a sectarian murder campaign. It was the same with the Shankill Butchers in Belfast many years ago. So there's always been collusion between the loyalist death squads. The loyalist death squads aren't just this. Loyalists are based in criminality and things like that, but they aren't just that. They have always been part and parcel of the British state, and its war against the Irish Republicans and the Irish people at the same time. So the collusion is, as I say, there's been a saying in Ireland for a very long time, and that's collusion is no illusion. It's state-sponsored murder, and that remains as true today as it does in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, because it's been acts of collusion in all of those decades and long before.
Yeah, absolutely shocking. And I appreciate you mentioning as well Drew Harris's role in the 26 counties as well. So there's no freedom from the grasp of MI5 across the entire territory.
Oh, you might as well say MI5 is in control of policing in the entire 32 counties.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. Speaking of collusion, there was a related question to this. KT Trap, I'm not sure how to pronounce that name. They say, I'd like to know if foreign states have colluded with the occupation forces. It seems like every apartheid cop has been trained by Israel.
Well, what's interesting there is that, as far as I know, the Zionists are actually trained by the RUC, PSNI, and the Brits. They actually come here to get their training, and then give it out to others. So the parallels of settler colonialism and this state-sponsored imperialist occupation of the north is the same, very, very similar situation in Palestine with the Zionist terrorists there. But there's this affinity between loyalists and Zionists, which is basically just the loyalists support the Zionists because the Republicans support the Palestinians, and there was this sort of superiority conflict of race hatred between the colonial settlers. The same as the Loyalists, the Zionists, and indeed apartheid South Africa, who also supported the British forces in the occupied six counties and sent weapons to the Loyalists. And many of the acts of collusion we were just discussing there were carried out, but with South African weapons through a British agent who arranged a called Brian Nelson, and he brought South African guns in to arm the Loyalist death squads with the full knowledge of the British government. And indeed, many unionist politicians, I think particularly in the DUP and other parties, went out to apartheid South Africa to support the white South Africans and to get their guns for their paramilitary death squads, which, as I say, were an official part of Britain's war in Ireland. And then even in later years, you can see American imperialism. Although it's always said that Irish America and the Irish diaspora were very supportive of the Republican movement down through the years. American imperialism has what they call and what they term a special relationship with Britain, because we know American imperialism is a child of British imperialism in similar ways that Zionism is a child of British imperialism. But in the years of the pacification process, you had U.S. President Bill Clinton coming to Ireland to play his part in getting Sinn Féin to back the pacification and the treaty of surrender in 1998, and he played a very big role in bringing the Reformist leadership of Sinn Féin into that British pacification process. So there has been a big cooperation between imperialist powers in supporting the British occupation of Ireland, without a doubt.
The imperialists are united. time for the
exactly.
oppressed masses. Time for the oppressed masses now to match that. Okay.
But I would say, if anybody wants to know more about those states, it'd be very interesting for international comrades to look up the situation between Brian Nelson and the South African guns and the arming of the death squads by British imperialism through apartheid South Africa. While in public they were probably arguing against apartheid, they were using apartheid South Africa to arm their death squads here in Ireland.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks very much, Seamus. Brilliant. Now, Carmel asked, what is to be done by AIA supporters and or Socialist Republican sympathisers who live in Britain? Do AIA support or plan to support agitation and organising specific to Irish liberation over in the United Kingdom, or the so-called United Kingdom, I suppose?
Well, I mean, there has been a long history of Irish Republican support groups internationally, and particularly in Britain down through the years, and especially during conflict that's been ongoing since 1969. You've had at various times Irish Republican prisoners imprisoned in jails in Britain who took the war over to England, and there's always been support groups there for them. But AIA would say that it would be great to see members of the English working class who, since the times of the Fenians, Irish Republicans have been calling on to support the national liberation struggle here, organising in the new conditions today to say that Britain should still get out of Ireland. And absolutely, we would support any moves by British, the English working class, by British socialists to organise solidarity groups in Ireland and do agitation on that question, because, as I say, it is still a live struggle. It is still a continuing struggle of resistance, and any support that we can get in Britain for that can really hit home to the people there that their country is still occupying ours will be very, very welcome. And if people have ideas on setting up or establishing such support groups in Britain, they can contact us on isrmedia@protonmail.com, and we'd be happy to talk to them and send them any of our materials that we can to help with such work.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. And I'm sure, of course, they can get involved in the Discord server and find ways of getting in touch through that as well. A few different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And following us on the Discord or the Facebook or the Instagram. But if they do want to get a conversation going, probably one of the quickest way will be through the Discord or through the Proton Mail.
Okay, very good. Now, we're coming up to our final question now from the Q&As, and probably just as well now. We're coming up to 2 hours. So the final question from the Q&A, and then we'll do an outro question before, if we want to shout out anyone, whatever. Final question from Red Spud is, great name, Red Spud. Would AIA have a clear approach or plan for the redistribution or approach to agriculture in Ireland?
I mean, that is a very big question from Red Spud. So thank you very much. And I mean, as I was talking at the start of the show about the a league of poor peasants in Brazil who are currently leading an agrarian revolution there, and obviously that's inspiring to see. And AIA would very much be of the opinion that the big industrial farms in Ireland, as part of the revolution, would need to be broken up. The ranches need to be broken up and redistributed to the small farmers. And that has always been a position of republicanism, that the Socialist Republic has often been called the Workers' and Small Farmers Republic. That's what Connolly called it. That's what other revolutionaries have called it. Seamus Costello did a lot of work with the farmers, the small farmers in Wicklow around this particular issue. And that is something that AIA will continue to support. And, returning to a position, we had an ancient Irish tradition of Coran a Corson, which was helping your neighbours at the time with the farm, at harvest time and things like that. So basically an early collective form of farming. And I know there's examples such as the Glen Columkill cooperative movement established by Father MacDwyer to make farming in Donegal, which is some of the worst land in the country, viable for the local community, so as they wouldn't have to emigrate. And a good comrade and friend of mine, Bill O'Brien, would know an awful lot more about that. But they ran a system I think it was called the Clops, where the local farms that each small farming family had, but they'd operate them collectively, and each would help each other, and one person would be engaged in farming one crop, and your neighbour would be doing something else. So it was collectively planned that there was enough to go around for everybody. And I think when we break the back of the the ranchers and the big landed farmers in Ireland as part of the revolution, such a type of returning to our original form of society in Ireland would be very, with the land, would be very much worthwhile, and that each small farmers would work together and collectively to support the community in such a way. And it's a way of ensuring that there's no such thing as food poverty, because one of the often not talked about issues in Ireland today is a food poverty. Where people don't have enough to eat, and they're forced to eat junk and fast food rather than real whole food. Where if you imagine if we had a collective form of cooperative farming across the country, where land is being used to meet the needs of the people rather than for industrial and imperialist profits, we could eradicate food poverty in Ireland and be very much the self-sufficient Ireland island that we're supposed to be.
Brilliant, brilliant. Listen, that's great. Thanks very much, Seamus. I really appreciate that, and a very interesting answers to all those questions there now. And we kept to the time pretty
So
well.
obviously, I'll just say on that that I'm answering that as someone from Dublin, so I'm sure some of my more rural comrades would have a more in-depth answer on the small farming question. But it is, as I say, it is a revolutionary question that does need to be solved by Socialist Republicans. And I think if Red Spud, who asked the question, has any ideas, I would like to hear them as well. And I'm sure other comrades within AIA would like to hear them. So I encourage them to, but you don't ask a question like that without having an idea himself, So I'd encourage them to send on any ideas. Either, I think you said that came into the Discord, so if he wants to post them there and they could be sent on to us, or by emailing them to us, it would be great to hear, you know what I mean? Because the Workers' and Small Farmers Republic is still the Revolutionary Socialist Republic, because that's the People's Republic Liam Mello spoke about.
Right, very good, very good. There's a lot there now. We've mentioned this a few times now. Just we're going to wrap up now. We have talked about a lot of stuff throughout, but how can people find out more about anti-imperialist action and get involved in the movement for Irish national liberation and socialist revolution? Now, I know we've touched on some stuff before, but if there's any other loose ends that haven't been addressed so far, now's the time. If there's anything else that you want to shout out, or any final words as well that you have before we end the stream, now's the time to do it.
Well, I mean, we're very active. We have a great online presence and a growing online presence, and I commend the comrades who are working. Hello?
You're back. You went for a second there, but you're back now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, I lost you there. I was just saying, I commend the comrades who are working on our online presence and building that into an online site of struggle for the Socialist Republican movement. But to make it easy for people, we have a website which is anti-imperialist-action-ireland.com, which is our main website, our official organ, if you will. We have a Facebook page. Now, Facebook continuously censors us and censor other Socialist Republican pages too, so we're regularly taken down. But our current incarnation is AIA, Ireland for National Liberation and Socialist Revolution. People can find us there. We have our Instagram as AIA Ireland. We have a Twitter, again, AIA Ireland. And then we have the Socialist Republican Discord server where people can come on, and it's a much more interactive way of dealing with people and discussing the struggle. But if people are interested in joining Anti-Imperialist Action or supporting it, if they're in Ireland and they want to join us, and I encourage as many people who want to play a role in the struggle to do so, or if they're overseas and they want to support us, the quickest way of doing so is to email us at isrmedia@protonmail.com, and we'll see what part of the country or where they are, and we'll get them in touch with an organiser and start that process, because we're a very growing movement and we have a lot of applications in all the time, and that's great to see. But as we say, we have a revolution to win in Ireland, so we can never have enough people, and that's what AIA is about. It's about mobilising the masses into that struggle. So anyone who's thinking, I want this year, to join and play my part in that struggle, I really encourage them to do so, and don't doubt yourself. Just get involved and find out, play your part with us through the quickest way through the email.
Fantastic. Okay, listen, thanks very much, James. It's been absolutely brilliant, very informative, very educational, and I really, really appreciate you coming on and taking the time out this evening to give this talk and to answer all of the questions of the comrades. It's been absolutely brilliant. And I also want to thank all the comrades who've been here with us. I see in the chat there, for example, I see Socialist Swan, Hunters Thompson, Yuri Skera, Jesse Doya, Vision Plant, Red Fenian Punk, Anarch Stalinists, and everyone else there who's there who I didn't call out there. Thanks very much for being here and for watching us and for being with us this evening. Definitely have a look there. All of the links that Seamus mentioned are in the description box below. You'll find all of them and some more. You'll also find links as well to the revolutionary artists, the art that you're seeing on the screen right now from the comrades like Lucha Liberation, Young Black Maoist, Black Liberationist, Queer Bolshevik, and so on. You'll find links to a lot more of their work as well below. You'll find links to their Twitters, to their Instagrams, and so on and so forth. So please do follow them and support the revolutionary internationalist work that they're doing. It's absolutely brilliant. And give solidarity where you can. Listen, everybody, thanks very much for being here. Thanks very much, Seamus. It's been absolutely great. And we'll talk to you again.
Thanks to you, Paul.
Cheers, comrades.
Thanks for having us on.
August long of all.